A very good morning to one and all. I am really happy and it is my pleasure to welcome all the participants to today's Global Virtual Conclave on New Education Policy 2020. I am really happy that this is my first program after taking charge as Head PG and Research Department of Nilagiri College of Arts and Science, Talur. Nilagiri College of Arts and Science, affiliated to the Bardiyar University, has been imparting quality education for the last 9 years. This is one of the most prestigious arts and science colleges in India. This institution works with commitments to create a just and a human society upholding national integration and religious harmony with special emphasis on the enrichment of the poor and the marginalized. Our college is accredited with ISO 9001 2015 certified institution and also accredited by University Grant Commission New Delhi with 2F and 12B status. It is my duty to welcome all the dignitaries to this function. I have immense pleasure in introducing our honorable chief guest and my best friend, philosopher and my guru, Mr. T.P. Srinivasan sir, IFS, former ambassador to the UN. I have been maintaining a very good relationship with Srinivasan sir and Dr. G. Madhavan sir for last 10 years. He was secretary to Ligands third class in Toyota and Legislation secretary first class in Thimphu, Bhutan from 1975-1977. He was secretary to Legation first class in Moscow from 1982 and 1986 to 1989. He was Indian High Commissioner in Suva, Fiji, and responsible for 7 other island nations in the South Pacific. From 1990 to 1995, he was a representative of the permanent representative at the UN headquarters from 1995 to 1997. He assumed the office of the Indian High Commissioner in Nairobi, Kenya, and served as a permanent representative of the Government of India at the United Nations office at Nairobi. From 1997 to 2000, he was Deputy Ambassador in Washington, D.C. From 2000 to 2004, he was Indian Ambassador in Vienna for Austria and Slovenia, as well as permanent representative of India to the United Nations and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Vienna, he retired 30th June 2004. Srinivasan sir was the former head of the Council for Higher Education of the state of Kerala and executive vice president with the rank of vice chancellor. He has continued as a columnist for a variety of newspapers and magazines, as he is a non-fictitious author of autobiographical works to his 37 years diplomatic career. On behalf of our Nilagiri family, a warm welcome to you, sir. Now I extend a warm welcome to our beloved Secretary and Managing Director, Mr. Rashid Ghazali, sir. He is an inspiring personality for all in the institution and international motivator and captain of our ship. He is our eye and heart of the Nilagiri family members. From the bottom of my heart, I welcome you, sir. I welcome our most respected Dean, Academic Professor Mohan Babu, sir. Welcome you, sir. I would like to welcome our beloved principal, Dr. N. Dure Muttarasan, sir. Welcome you, sir. I welcome our chief admin, Dr. Dure, sir. Welcome you, sir. I extend my welcome to today's panel member, Professor Dr. A. Vimela, Head Department of Career Guidelines, Dean of Education, Bardiyar University, Coimbatore. On behalf of our Nilagiri family, we welcome you, ma'am. I extend my welcome to today's panel members, Dr. V. Ravi Kumar, former Principal CMS IMS, Coimbatore and Head Marketing, Amarda School of Business, Coimbatore. On behalf of our Nilagiri family, we welcome you, sir. I extend my welcome to today's panel member, today's international panel member, Mr. Mahesh K. Suresh, Research Associate from Switzerland. Mahesh was my student for BCom in 2012 at CMS College, Coimbatore. He is one of the panelists of our program for last 2 days. On behalf of our Nilagiri family, we welcome you, sir. It's my pleasure to welcome to all the heads of the departments and all the participants from worldwide, and finally my dear loving students of Nilagiri family. Welcome to this historical event. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, welcoming all the dignitaries and the delegates to this program. I would like to call upon the legendary leader of Nilgiri College of Arts and Science, Dr. M. Duraimutharajan, for the presidential address. Sir, please.
Very happy morning to all those who gathered here through Zoom and Facebook Live. On behalf of Nilgiri College of Arts and Science family, I cordially invite you all for this wonderful event as Global Virtual Conclave on New Education Policy. I also call us Meet the Legends for 3 days, that is 18, 19, and 20th October 2020. And all our faculty fraternities and the students of Nilgiri College of Arts and Family working under the great leadership that is none other than Rashid Ghazali sir. And my dear mentor, that is Professor Mohan Babu, academic dean, and my dear friend Dr. M. Durai, and the chief guest of the day, that is Professor T.P. Srinivasan, who is a former ambassador for many countries. And then the heads of various departments, and then officers and the young learners of today. Thank you very much for being part of this global conclave, NEP. Last but not least, I would like to give heartfelt thanks to Professor P.P. Abdul Razak, head PG and Com research, to make this event happen. And also, I have a privilege to introduce the chief guest of the day. I'm adding whatever the Professor Razak has left out. So I'm adding one more a flavor to Dr. Professor T. Srinivasan. I take the privilege for introduction of the chief guest, that is Professor T.P. Srinivasan, born in the year 1944 in Kayangulam. Mr. Srinivasan has a creditable academic record, having stood first in BA English and MA English, and also he speaks the foreign language, that is Japanese and Russian. A former ambassador and a permanent representative of India to the UN, Vienna, and Governor of India for International Atomic Energy Agency, Vienna, ambassador to Austria and Slovenia in the year 2000 to 2004. He served as the Indian Foreign Services for the 37 years. He is also Deputy Chief of Mission in the Embassy of India, Washington, the year 1997 to 2000. And he is also High Commissioner of India to Kenya and Permanent Representative Nations in Nairobi during the year 1995 to 97. And it goes on like that. And he was a very he's of Indian Foreign Services. And Mr. T.P. Srinivasan sir has nearly 20 years of experience in multinational diplomacy and has represented international conferences organized by UN and Commonwealth and non-aligned movement. Welcome you, sir, on behalf of Nilgiri College of Arts and Science family. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your great words. Now we have Nilgiri College of Arts and Sciences blessed with a great leader and a motivator and art director. He is none other than our Managing Director and Secretary, welcoming Mr. Rashid Ghazali, Management Coach and Spiritual Psychologist, for the opening remarks. Sir, kindly, please.
Good morning, everyone. Actually, we all are eager to listen to our chief guest, Dr. T.P. Srinivasan sir. So we don't want to spend much of our time for the formalities, and we will be straight away getting to the session. And I just wanted to share the outline of today's, the last day of our conclave. Successfully, we completed first 2 days with enlightening sessions. And the first day it was initiated by G. Madhavan Nair sir, and the second day it was Honorable Vice Chancellor, and the last day, and which is the most awaited day of national education policy, in the presence of the great veteran scholar and an international celebrity academician, so Professor T.P. Srinivasan sir. And the conclave was addressing the important aspects of our NEP. And the first day we were discussing about the broader idea of the NEP. And the second day we were discussing about the standardization and the educational quality enhancement areas. And the last day, the key focus of today's conclave, the discussion, that will be the major focus will be this. Number one, NEP as a gateway to gain global exposure, and internationalization of higher education in India, and imparting best practices of global education, and challenges in shaping our Indian education truly international. and role of technology and modern tools in improvising learning practices. So I'm pretty sure that because while we were segregating the topics for all the 3 days, so we were planning with in connection with the faculties or the eminent personalities who are taking part in the consecutive days. And today, with the presence of TP Srinivasan sir, that would be very much ideal to discuss the NEP in a global perspective, because he is the one, he is the very few among the few academicians who have gone with international exposure and with umpteen years of experience in the foreign countries. That means that in many other educational and diplomatic areas. So he will be the best person to speak about NEP, because NEP is the one which, though it is new policy for India, which is actually prevalent in many of the modern countries from long before. And for us only it is new. The many of the apprehensions or the many of the recommendations made by NEP, which we discussed last days, so it is quite practically implemented in those countries from long years before. So he is the person who would have experienced and have internalized all these the insights, and he is the one who was propagating and who was sharing his insights to create a drastic change in the field of higher education. So we should have to thank him for his efforts over the last couple of years while he was heading the Higher Education Commission in the state of Kerala. He did a great effort to materialize many of our long time awaited the aspirations in the higher education field. So we will be so eager to listen him. Initially, sir will give us his remarks, and after that, the panelists will share their own insights the following the presentation. And after that, there will be us. We all were sharing the open forum with the queries and questions. Today, we will be having the final sharings from the participants. Anybody can come up with their reflections and or else the questions and queries. And I hope, as communicated by our beloved chief guest, he would try himself to best of his available time to spend with us, to give maximum time and interaction possible in this venue. So with all privilege and pleasure and pride, we invite Dr. TP Srinivasan sir to this Augustus Assembly. And I wanted to just share, right now we have crossed 450 participants in this forum, and that too from different parts of the world. We have delegates from yesterday also. While we were shortlisting the candidates list, so we could see that there were people from Europe. There were, majority of them are born and brought up in India, but working in abroad in Middle East and European countries and so on. And there are representations from almost all the states of our country, with the teachers, student scholars, and research the aspirants. And for the students and other people who were not registered, so we have made this presentation and the program live in the Facebook. And yesterday also more than 2,000 people viewed in Facebook, though as they were not registered for this event. So thanking you very much, and I happily welcome Professor TP Srinivasan sir for being with us on time, and not on time but before time. So we welcome you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ghazali, distinguished principal, Mr. Abdul Razak, my old friend from Coimbatore, the distinguished faculty, students, participants, and guests. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very, very important webinar, which is globally conceived. But I must begin by saying, as the two introducers mentioned, I spent the best part of my life in diplomacy, not in education. And I became an educationist by accident. When I came back to Kerala after 40 years abroad, the Chief Minister of Kerala felt that my experience could be used in modernizing education in Kerala. And that was the only reason why I was summoned to do this. And in the 5 years that I did that job, as Mr. Ghazali mentioned, we tried various experiments and various proposals. And we focused on 6 aspects of higher education in Kerala. First is infrastructure. Second was teachers training. Third was use of technology. Fourth was autonomy. fifth was research, and sixth was internationalization. So we felt that these were the 6 areas in which we needed to have immediate reform, without which we would remain far behind the rest of the world. In fact, education system had changed in the last 10 years more than it had in the last 100 years. And we have remained with a 19th century mindset and a 20th century syllabus, training our youngsters to live and work in the 21st century. So there is a long gap between our mindset, our system of education, and what we should be today. And for this purpose, we sent into the government a blueprint based on those 6 acts, and also sent various proposals. But unfortunately, because of the politicization of education in Kerala and sharp differences on issues like private universities, internationalization, open education, liberal education, etc., we could not accomplish much except for a record of all that we have done in a book called Education of an Ambassador. What I meant was I got educated in the process. And that is my contribution. But what makes me happy is the fact that the new education policy, which has been approved by the cabinet and presented, contains a large number of our recommendations. In some chapters, almost exact words that we used. The chapter on linkages between educational institutions and industry. The chapter is almost identical with what we had proposed. So that makes me feel pleased that many of our ideas have been accepted. And that is one of the reasons why I'm a very ardent proponent of this policy. Of course, they have gone much beyond what we had imagined, and a very clear and comprehensive change. And this comprehensive change is aimed at improving the quality of education and making it one of the most advanced system of education for the needs of the 21st century. It has emphasized learning, research, and innovation. And as the Prime Minister said, the idea is to give the students the education that they want. The principle behind this whole policy is economic prosperity through the development of a knowledge economy. And also its social role has been emphasized: compassion, empathy, courage, resilience, scientific temper, and creative imagination. So the whole approach is to create an education which is suitable for the 21st century, keeping in mind the fact that we have this great demographic dividend awaiting us. This, as all of you understand it, it is a unique opportunity for India to provide the intellectual framework for the whole world, because we are going to be the youngest country in the next 5 or 10 years. We will have something like 96 million people under the age of 35, while most other countries, advanced countries even, are much older than that. And this demographic dividend, if we have to achieve and also get benefit from it, our education has to move very fast forward so that the graduates who come out of the 21st century will not be stuck with the kind of studies and syllabus and curricula that we are now dealing with. It is an altogether different world. And therefore, that is the effort of this. And therefore, the whole idea was to deal with some of the fundamental issues which we had identified ourselves, like employability, stressful examinations, lack of practical knowledge, excessive regulation, lack of a language policy, opportunities for dropouts, internal assessments, improving credits, role of private sector and funding. So these are all the issues that were tackled, and all these recommendations are based on that. Of course, the policy has started where it should be at the beginning, and school education was also given much attention. But of course, our topic today is not that. We will move on to internationalization aspects. In internationalization, what we proposed was not to bring foreign universities into India. That was not our role. As a state education council, we did not want to make that suggestion because that is within the purview of the parliament. But what we proposed was simply to create linkages with foreign universities as proposed by the UGC. There are at least 10 or 12 areas in which the University Grants Commission had already approved linkages with global universities. And I found to my horror that none of Kerala's universities had made any attempt in order to link up with foreign universities, as though it was some kind of a taboo. It was only MG University, the present Vice Chancellor, Dr. Sabu Thomas, seemed to be the only one who gave some focus and attention to internationalization of education. So what we had proposed was to link with all these universities, number one, and secondly, use the massive, what is called MOOCs, massive open education system that is available for several years. So massive open online courses have been in position for a long time. And it was invented by a Bangladeshi who taught his niece in Bangladesh mathematics sitting in New York. And he realized that instead of teaching one person, he could teach more. And today it is Khan Academy, which has become a global institution, teaching students from any of the best universities in the world. So our strategy was first to linkages with this, and secondly, to make use of the MOOCs courses. But MOOCs courses are available and anybody can take these courses free. But at the same time, there was no incentive for it because none of these was recognized here. So our idea was to give credit to those who do MOOCs courses from the top universities of the world and give them credit for it, and so that they have incentive to do these courses. And this would have filled a huge gap between the knowledge that our teachers have and the knowledge that our students have to acquire. We cannot send our teachers back to school, and they have studied their physics, chemistry, and biology 30 years ago. And they are still repeating those to our students, which is of no consequence. And therefore, this gap, we thought, should be brought about as a result of giving recognition to these courses from the best universities in the world. The other proposal that we put forward was that we must have private universities. In fact, Kerala is the only state in the whole of India which does not permit private universities. And we made a proposal to start private universities in Kerala. We had something like 10 offers from Kerala itself to build universities. And so this is a combination of these three. Apart from there were other proposals, I'm not going into that because that's not our topic. So this was our idea of internationalization. About 4 or 5 years ago, a bill was introduced in the parliament to allow foreign universities to operate in India. But it has not been approved because of vested interests. It was not even discussed, and it still remains there. And one of the things that the new education policy has revived is that proposal, which of course needs Parliament's approval, to have foreign universities to have campuses in India. It is a very strict kind of a regime that they're proposing. They're proposing that these universities can come and open their campuses, and these should be only the top 100 universities in the world, not any university, number one. Secondly, those universities will have to operate within the framework of our social and other requirements for universities in India, scholarships, reservations, etc. And more than anything else, the condition is also that it should be non-profit. No profit will be repatriated to abroad. So there were doubts as to whether these are possible. First of all, getting just the first 100 best universities in the world is a little bit too ambitious, because we do not have a single university even in the first 200 best universities in the world. So then how can you expect that the best 100 universities in the world will come to India? So we will have to, I suppose, relax that a little bit, because there are many more than 100 good universities in the world, and we will have to be broader. Whether they will come on the basis of no profit, I have no doubt that they will come. There are already about 600 agencies within India which are promoting education abroad. They are, of course, basically money-making institutions, linking students with institutions abroad and getting them admissions at a very heavy cost, and that's already there. And some of the major universities, I understand, I cannot verify this, have already purchased land in India, expecting that they would come when the permission is received. Why would they come? This is something that we have to think about. They would come not to make money, as people seem to worry about. They also seem to think that they will, somehow disturb the kind of atmosphere in the academic life in India, and fear that foreign influence, the CIA, all kinds of fears and ghosts that haunt us in India all the time for political reasons. But they will come basically because India is a vast laboratory of experiences. There is nothing in India, or there's nothing in the world, good or bad, which does not exist in India. We have a developed health system. At the same time, we have all the diseases in the world. We have an urban system. There are so many. So it's a kind of laboratory where the world's scholars would like to get the benefit of that experience and the ability to study how this experiment of the biggest democracy is functioning. And this will be of immense value to them. And I believe that would be the reason why they would come here. So we don't need to have any kind of apprehensions, but I do not know how long it will take for the parliament to approve this. So what we can do today, as far as internationalization is concerned, to make use of the existing facilities already in our regulations and systems. For example, we can have joint degrees with foreign universities. We can do joint research with foreign universities. We can actually send our faculty to foreign universities. We can get the faculty from abroad. We can send our students. All these are permitted in the existing regulations. Therefore, there is nothing that prevents us from internationalizing our education at a very fast speed without waiting for the 20 years that the government has given itself to complete the process of education reform in India. So when we talk about the normal question that generally asked in India is, why is it that none of India's the best institutions, not even the IITs, are in the list of the first 100 best universities of the world? This question is being asked again and again. There have been occasions when the Bangalore Institute or a Punjab Agricultural University, figuring in, say, about 200 or 300. Beyond that, we have not been able to go. And therefore, we investigated, we inquired as to what these criteria are for getting the status of a global university or a first-rate university in India. We discovered by consulting the various agencies that is interested in, in this categorization, they told us that the first and foremost thing is, how many Nobel Prizes has your university got? 0, isn't it? Our last Nobel Prize was for Rabindranath Tagore more than 100 years ago. And all other Indians who have got Nobel Prizes have got by experience abroad, not from India. The second question they ask is, how much of foreign faculty do you have? Again, more or less zero answer. How many foreign universities we have in our universities? Very small. How many patents have our universities taken? Very few. So in these circumstances, if we need to improve our general standing in the education field in the world, we need to internationalize. And that is what we have to bear in mind. So, and the major advantage in having foreign universities in India or their campuses here is the competition that will bring about. And that is exactly the fear that the existing universities and private universities have. They are afraid that tomorrow, if there is a Harvard campus in New Delhi, everybody will want to go to Harvard University and nobody will go to any of the others. And this is a fear which is unfounded, because they are not going to come, and every student in India is not going to go to Harvard University. There will be limitations, there will be very few people, it will be cost expensive, there will be so many factors. But the one that will create is competition. And that competition is going to completely transform our education system. Just take the example of banks. I mean, you're all too young to remember that. In my time, when you had to cash a rupee 10 check as a student, that's all that I could afford. You go to the state bank and present your check and they'll give you a token. Even today, ironically, the logo of the state bank is a token, but they don't use it anymore. And you will wait for 4 hours for your 10 rupees to be delivered. This is the terrible system of banking in India. And today, State Bank says, we are in your pocket. Your bank is in your pocket. Your mobile is your bank. How did this happen? This happened simply because of competition from foreign banks. Because they came and presented an alternative, which was not thought of by us. Not that we did not have the technology. And a similar change will take place in the education system when we are faced with this kind of competition and the opportunity to do that. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. That is not necessary for the education system to improve. It has already been, many things have been established. What is it that we want to do in reforming education, as Dr. Kasturi Rangan has done in this report? He has looked for the best practices around the world. And then he has picked and chosen ideas which have already been established as successful. And that is why he has introduced vocational training at a fairly early age. I feel a little bit too early because he's talking about the age of 16 that vocational education should start. He has emphasized a clear need for a policy on language, which he has done. He has introduced what is called multidimensional, multidisciplinary institutions. Every institution should be multidisciplinary. And we should get rid of affiliation system. This shocks most people in India, particularly in Kerala. What do we do without affiliation? My God. How will these universities be looked after? How will it be saved? How will it be monitored? Who will hold the elections? No such issue arises. There is no affiliation system in any part of the world anymore. Where we got from UK. UK itself has abolished it. And that is where we have to start with autonomy. I was able to create 20 autonomous colleges in Kerala, much against the wish of a lot of managements, a lot of faculty, and many students, because of the fear of the unknown. They felt that the autonomous colleges will completely destroy the system. And instead, these 20 colleges became the best. They were already the best in Kerala, but they began to deliver. Results started coming 15 days after the examination, not 15 months. And this kind of improvement took place But two things happened. One was the teachers were overstressed because we are not very familiar with internal assessment. Teachers feel that it's an imposition on them. They think that they just go to the class, give their lectures. That's what they were called. They were not called professors. They were called lecturers. So they're virtually lecturing the students and walking home. And the university holds the examination. Simple. So there is no linkage between what they teach and what the university gives, except by experience. And therefore, the stress on the teachers increased because they had to assess individuals, decide what they should teach, decide how they should deliver the examination, and how the results should be formed. And the university was simply going to undersign the results. And this created a revolution in its own way. But unfortunately, once that government went, the present government has lost enthusiasm for autonomous colleges. And they simply told the autonomous colleges that we will not protect you. You do what you want with your university, and if you have quarrels with your university, go to a court of law. What an unfortunate situation. And therefore, we are back to square one. They are called autonomous, but there's hardly any autonomy given to them in terms of academic interests. And so we had a setback. But I now find that the present government has started seeing lights in this. They have actually given autonomy to engineering colleges suddenly. We had not given autonomy to engineering colleges, but they have given that. So there is some hope. If the principle was the problem, and that has been changed, and I hope that the autonomous colleges will be strengthened, not only in other states, of course it is working. And the second thing that happened because of the autonomous colleges was that the government, while allowing them to introduce new vocational and other courses in their colleges, they would not fund it. Even in the aided colleges, they said, you can change your course, you can move, do what you like, but we will not give you any money. And therefore, most of these autonomous colleges had to introduce self-financing programs in the autonomous colleges, and therefore these colleges became expensive. In fact, one of the principals told me that that is the unfortunate part he has found. His college was a poor man's college, but now it has become a rich man's college. So these were the two disadvantages that we encountered, but those can also be certainly resolved. And the advantage, if we had introduced autonomous colleges earlier, was that UGC was proposing that those autonomous colleges which have functioned for 15 years or more will become universities automatically. And that opportunity we don't have for a long time. So if the affiliation system ends, there will be complete autonomy for colleges. And with the arrival of the universities from abroad and flourishing of private universities, we may be able to give our students a good education and a good examination system. You know, the whole world, the tendency is to avoid the kind of examinations that we give to our students. We do essay writing. Anything that Archimedes' principle or whatever, or Newton's laws, you write an essay, you get marks, and you are a scientist, you are a graduate. But that is not the system anymore. Whatever you have learned has to be applied to a specific problem or a specific situation. And that is how examinations are held. We all know about the model in Finland, but there are no examinations in any class except solution of problems. But we are still writing essays and becoming scientists and engineers and doctors. So all these have to change, and this can change only if we have the new system. Then one other attractive thing that I found in the new education policy is the 4-year degree program. This is an astonishing invention. Of course, it is practiced in some countries. And in fact, Delhi University introduced it. One vice chancellor introduced it. And everybody jumped onto him saying, you're an American, etc. And the poor man had to withdraw it. But it had a logic. And that logic has been explained. Because when you join a university, you are not very sure what you are joining. particularly in Kerala. Everybody wants to join first group or second group or third group. That's all. There is no other option. There is no choice. And therefore, you jump into an option or you get an admission where it is possible to get an admission. And then after 1 year, they will find that they are in the wrong place. What do? They either have to drop out and go to the Gulf, or they have to continue and learn things which they don't want to learn. And here there is this splendid opportunity. After 1 year, you can drop out with a certificate, but your credits will remain in a bank. And you can do what you want, like the children do in Western countries. They take a year off and go on a trip around the world. That will educate them more than 1 year in the university. And similarly, you can go and do some work somewhere, make some money so that your parents don't have to pay your fees. And then you come back to the same course or join some other course. And second year, you get a diploma. You can probably get a job. Third year, you get a degree. And fourth year, you go straight into research. And MPhil is also being abolished. So a very clear path has been found. There have been many famous dropouts in the world, as you know. Many billionaires have been dropouts. So now we don't have to feel ashamed about being a dropout because you can pursue your education in a new way or in a more productive manner yourself. So there are so many of these very, very interesting proposals here. But what we have to look at is the possibility of our catching up with the rest of the world, for which we need to really work very hard. And that is where the internationalization will help. We have to compete not only here. 40% of our youngsters do not work in Kerala. They go to the rest of India or they go abroad. And even students, parents who can afford to pay their fees, they send them as far as possible as they can afford. If they can afford only up to Bangalore, they send them to Christ University in Bangalore. They don't keep them here. If they can afford more, they'll send them to Delhi University or the new universities. And they are better off, they'll send them to United States or UK or Germany. All the rich people do that. All the politicians do that. So what we are doing is we are exporting our students, making them indebted to the banks of the world, borrowing money and sending them out. And instead, why don't you bring these universities and the system into India? And this is how we have to see it. Of course, there are so many objections. Kerala government statements are shocking. The minister said this is the death knell of public education. What public education are you talking about? What benefits are they creating? And they said that this globalization is, of course, is all corporate. And what is this tradability or commoditization of education? All these charges were hurled against me when I tried it, and now they are being hurled against this education policy also. So what I'm saying is that there are 4 issues on which the political parties in Kerala and in India have to come to some consensus if this has to succeed. Number 1, on purpose of education. If you ask 10 educationists what the purpose of education, they will give you 10 different versions, ranging from Swami Vivekananda's ideas that everybody is an educated person, you only have to bring that out. There are others who say that it should be the head, the heart, and the hand. And there are others who say it's only employability is all that we are seeking. So from spirituality to employability, there is a huge range, and we cannot make up our minds. Why can't we have a mix of all and create a consensus on that? Secondly, we have to have a consensus on how much privatization you are going to allow. And on that, there is no agreement. Many people see it as exploitation, and that has to be resolved. Third is the language. What kind of language? So this education policy outlines the 3-language formula. Of course, Tamil Nadu still has problems with it, but we have no problem with it. We are quite happy with the 3-language formula. And finally, internationalization. So in all these 4 areas, unless there is some agreement among political parties, we will be searching in the dark. Even after the policy has been approved by the cabinet, we are saying that this has to be discussed. Yes, certainly. This is being discussed since 2005, as far as I know. And okay, we can discuss it more. Tons and tons of paper was generated from all walks of life. It is from there that we created it. So let's have more discussion. But what we have to remember is that we will lose another 10 years. We will lose another 20 years, which will be very, very tragic. That is why I think the Prime Minister said that when we celebrate the 75th anniversary of Indian independence, that is 2 years from now, he wants the reform process complete, at least in the school education sector. And he said a very interesting thing. He said the mark sheet has become the biggest curse of the students and the parents. We are so much stuck with this mark sheet idea. And he said, I want to liberate our students from the mark sheets. Let their education be global. Let there be holistic and not stuck on mark sheets and the competition to create more and more graduates without giving them any substantive education. So it is a matter of great urgency, and there are things that we can do on our own. Even your own college can do various things. I suggested, for example, teachers training. We say it's a bit difficult to make teachers train. Why not take your young teachers and put them in the classes of senior teachers? Let them spend 4 months there. That's enough. But neither the senior teachers nor the junior teachers want to accept that. The senior teachers say, no, I have my own trade secrets. I'm not going to reveal it. And the youngsters say, oh, I have a first-class master's degree and education and NEET examination or whatever, or SAT examination, and therefore I won't sit in any of these classes. This is the kind of mentality that is preventing us from doing things ourselves. So like in English, they say there are these low-hanging fruits which can easily be picked up, and reform can be introduced without waiting for the big changes. And that will set in motion a process which will benefit the country as a whole. Thank you very much. I will stop here and then answer questions if necessary towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Indeed, it was an enlightening speech. Actually, we all thoroughly enjoyed, because unlike with any others, because when you are talking about globalization and bringing up global exposure to the education system in India, so which is purely experiential, that because you have gone through the fundamentals of global exposure and education in different countries, which has been successfully implemented over the period of last many years. So I think your efforts in the higher education and especially in the globalizing aspects, or bringing global exposure to the education system, it's remarkable. So we thank you wholeheartedly for your wonderful presentation, and I think we love to see you at the end for the question and answer session. And I hope sir will be able to continue till the end. And just as a token of love and gratitude from Nilgiri family, we wanted to share our appreciation and gratitude to you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now we move on to the panel discussion, and Srinivasan sir, I think you can take a small break, and I'll give you a message so that when the question answer session starts, because
no, I'll just make some coffee and come back.
Yeah, please. You may switch off the video, and I'll text you so that you won't sit for long. Thank you. So I think some people have raised to raise the questions to the TP Srinivasan sir. Sir will come. Sure, he will be continuing with us till the end, and because we'll have to finish the panel talks before. And I would love to welcome Madam Vimala, Dr. Vimala Madam. So she is why we have chosen Vimala Madam to the panel, because in Bharatiyar University yesterday Vice Chancellor have clearly mentioned the initiatives taken to blended education and many of the exposures with connecting with the global universities. So it is one of the pioneer model comparing to any other universities. The Bharatiyar University has done many initiatives to link with international universities and organizations. So the one who is leading all this mission is Dr. Vimala Madam, representing the Career Extension Department and the exchange the student and staff exchange department of Bharatiyar University. So she will be the one who can surely add some insights on the topic in terms of globalization and internationalization of the higher education, and how far, while implementing these kind of measures in the education system as representing university. So I think her experience would definitely add some laurels to this dice. And I welcome Dr. Vimala Madam, Head of the Career Education and Extension Department at Bharatiya University, and one of the non-academician and a trainer, Vimala Madam, to reflect her insights on the topic. Thank you, Madam. Well, and now with her permission, we'll move on to the second panelist, as she is away from the connectivity. So this is Dr. Ravi. Ravi sir is also will be speaking about the higher education aspects and bringing foreign universities to India, and what are the challenges which we are going to face. And here, T.P. Srinivasan sir was also sharing his remarks on bringing foreign universities and linking with foreign universities. I think the area which the panel speaker has taken it's the same topic, and I would love to welcome Amrita, Institute of Management Studies marketing head, and the former principal of CMS, Institute of Management Studies, to enlighten us with his remarks. Ravi sir, yeah, you can.
Good morning to all.
Yeah.
Honorable Chief Guest, Professor T.P. Srinivasan, Secretary of Nilgiri College of Arts and Science, Mr. Rashid Ghazali, Professor Mohan Babu, the Academic Dean of Nilgiri College of Arts and Science, Dr. Durai Muttarasan, the Principal of Nilgiri College of Arts and Science, the esteemed faculty members of the reputed institution, Dr. Vimala, who is going to be the next panelist, the head of the career guidance of Bharatiya University, other dignitaries who are present in this meeting, another panelist, Mr. Mahesh, and then Dr. Abdul Razak, who actually invited me yesterday to speak a few words about this NEP. And within a short span of time, I think I have been able to do something, hopefully. So I'll just take you to my slideshow presentation. So with the permission of everyone, I would like to delve into the topic, National Education Policy, Challenges on the Entry of Foreign Universities. I think at this moment I should express a big gratitude to be here, because I was able to listen to an excellent speech by Mr. T.P. Srinivasan. He has given so much of insights into the aspect of entry of foreign universities. And I think I've really learned a lot in the session which I have heard. I was thoroughly listening to it. Thank you very much, Mr. Srinivasan, for that wonderful presentation. So let me come to my part of the panel discussion, challenges on entry of foreign universities. Now, we all know that foreign universities are going to come. Okay, probably it's a question of time before it is passed, and then they are all setting their foot on the Indian soil. But of course, like we all know, things are not going to be very easy after their entry. So therefore, there are a lot of stakeholders who are going to be challenged. And it is for these stakeholders to probably face these challenges and overcome these challenges. So the background details for the presentation is, of course, foreign universities are allowed to set up campuses in India as per the new education policy. We are all aware of that. So only the top 100 global universities will be allowed to operate in India. This is very interesting and very challenging also, because when you talk of top 100 global universities, a lot of big names will come up, and we don't know how many of them are going to come into India. And if they come into India, it is really a big boon for all the students, because there's going to be high improvement in quality of the education that is going to be rendered. Of course, like Mr. Srinivasan is saying, if these top 100 global universities do not come, what next? That is a big challenge. The figure of the Indian students studying abroad is about 8.5 lakhs. Okay, this figure tells us that lots and lots of students are migrating to foreign countries to pursue their education there, which is an economic loss for the country. And also we can talk slightly in future, if they plan to settle down there, a brain drain also. The total outflow of money for such education is about $3 billion. Okay, this is huge money that is going out of India for such education. We are all aware of the huge cost of educating students in the foreign universities. In the current scenario, there are close to 875 universities in the country and about 40,000 colleges. This is bound to increase as it goes by. So which means that so many people are there, so many organizations are there, so many entities are there, which is going to vie for the share of the education. But let me tell you that there's space for all, because what happens is, as per the NEP, the gross enrollment ratio is forecast for about 50%. So which means that there is going to be space for all. I think it is going to be challenging. The number of international students studying in India is about 48,000. So which means that many students from foreign countries also are coming to India to study. Especially when we're talking of quality education they want in India, they come and join the IITs and IIMs. Plus, there are many other students from global destinations coming and occupying space in regular universities and colleges also. So this is an opportunity for those going abroad to study, have a similar education in India. It's a good opportunity. Similarly, an opportunity for the international students to come into India and get into the universities that are going to come and set foot into India. So let us see what are the challenges for the government when the foreign institutions are setting up their campuses in the country. First thing is regulations and accreditation. When we talk of regulations, we have so far UGC and AICTE doing a wonderful job on the regulating the institutions and the universities. But after this NEP has come, the Higher Education Commission of India has suggested that they have 4 verticals. The 4 verticals are divided as National Higher Education Regulatory Council, National Accreditation Council, Higher Education Grants Council, General Education Council. So these are the regulations that are going to come in place. So if you see, they have bifurcated it to focus on these areas. The regulation in one part, accreditation on one part, grants in one part, and the general education in the other part. So this is going to give a lot of focus to the institutions, whether they are Indian institutions or whether they are foreign institutions setting up their base camp in India. And it has been very clearly said in the NEP that foreign universities are expected to fall within the purview of these regulations. But then the challenge lies in the framework of these regulations. See, foreign universities are set in a different environment. They have got adapted to a different environment. So they're going to come into a country like India, where there is going to be a common regulation, or there could be a different type of regulations. How far the government is able to impose these regulations on these universities and get the best results out of it. This is a challenge. So the government themselves has to study how these universities are and probably do some framework for them. That is a big challenge for them. Framework exclusively customized maybe to these foreign universities are going to come. That is going to be a big challenge for them. When we talk of accreditation, we know that nowadays we have the UGC, AICTE, the NIR of rankings, the NAC, the NBA. All these are the accreditation processes which all the colleges are now vying to get into. This gives a little bit of ranking, a little bit of weightage to their brand. All these things are happening. And then if you take a foreign scenario, there are again regional accreditations for them. Plus we have the AACSB, that is the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business. Then we have the EQUIS accreditation, that the European Quality Improvement System, that is from Brussels in Belgium. And we have the ASIC accreditation service for international schools, colleges, and universities, that is in UK. So all these are the types of accreditations available there, in which those foreign universities are accustomed to those sort of accreditation, those sort of processes. Even in India also, some of the universities and some of the campuses are going in for AACSB accreditation and EQUIS certification to improve their branding. So when these foreign universities come into India, how much are they going to flex and how much are they going to adapt to the new environment? What is the challenge for the government is to do these criteria, the criteria for the evaluation in such a way that it suits them. That is a challenge that's facing the government. So they may have to borrow some points from the earlier NIR of NAC. They have to borrow some points from the AACSB EQUIS, which maybe they're already doing, already planning. And with that only, they will have to put in the accreditation framework. So the accreditation team, that is one of the verticals which I mentioned, is going to have a very challenging task of framing an accreditation policy for these foreign institutions when it is going to come into India. The next point is on curtailing the pricing. As you know, the cost of studying abroad is very huge. If you want to do a BBA course, for example, it may cost about 30 to 35 lakhs in an institution in a year. Okay, so this is the pricing which they are having in mind, which they may be coming to India. Like Mr. Srinivasan was saying, that could not be possible because of the fact that, in India is always a price-sensitive market, always a price-sensitive market. How much of it government will allow? This is a challenge for the government. Okay, maybe the students are willing to pay, but when it comes to the economically weaker section student who also wants to study in an institution of eminence which has come from foreign, how much is the fees that he can be charged? That could be the challenge for the government in trying to bring out some flexible fees which will suit the upper class and also the middle class and also the deserving in the economically backward. So how much autonomy will be given in the fees fixing? Now we know that when we are filing for the fees, okay, we have to go by the basic fees, which AICTE demands that the fees should not exceed this much amount. So whether the challenge for the government is what sort of basic fees which they can fix for these foreign institutions where they're coming to India. This is again one of the challenges. So from the government point of view, the regulations, accreditations, and the pricing when these international universities come in is going to be a big challenging task. Next challenge is for the entrance with the foreign universities that are going to come into India. The adaptation to the laws of the land. This is always a perennial problem when they come in, because India, as we know, is the biggest democracy, and the political scenario is also there. It may be stable at sometimes, it may be unstable at sometimes. So how these laws are going to be adjustable to the new entrants? Geographical problems, when they try to locate themselves in different places, there could be some resistance, some hindrance. So this is a challenge again for the entrants. The quotas, we have the reservations. Okay, how much of the foreign institutions are going to abide by the reservations is going to be challenging for them. Because all said and done, we know that it's a service-oriented thing. But everybody, even now, if you take all those big universities which are functioning, everyone, we call them not-for-profit organizations, but they need the money for the development. Because when things are going to become independent, and they're going to do things independently, there's definitely a need for money to take their education business forward. So how this is going to impact them, how they're going to manage this is going to be a big challenge for the entrance. Culture-specific orientation. When the students from India are going abroad and when they are going to study there, they quickly adapt to that situation. For example, if they say they're staying in a hostel there, and the hostel says that we can provide you only this type of food, okay, the students completely adapt to the type of food and start adjusting there and living there for the years in their education. But when these foreign universities are coming to India and when they are setting up campuses here, they are definitely going to have students from different states who are going to come and learn in these campuses. How far these new entrants, the foreign entrants, are able to adapt to them, how far they are able to give them customization, what the student requires. Maybe like I told you in the example, the hostel facilities, to the different sort of culture diversification, how they are going to merge all these things and conduct it as a proper campus is also going to be a big challenge for the institutions which are coming. Challenge for the existing institutions. Poaching of staff. Okay, this is one thing that could be happening when the foreign universities are going to come. There are highly talented, highly skilled human resource capital available in many of the institutions. And they will be hot-picked by these foreign institutions that are coming. And of course, the movement will be there because the salary packages will be good. Already in our peer circles, we can hear our friends and colleagues talking of when they come in, we could apply there, we could get in there. This is the type of talk that is taking place. So which means that in the existing institutions, the challenge will be to retain the staff, retain the highly skilled staff who will be looking for some movement to the other institutions. And so there has to be a strategy for that, and that is a big challenge for these institutions, for the existing institutions. Then we say the huge investments are necessitated. Rightly, Mr. Srinivasan had pointed out that competition is going to be immense. I will say that it's going to be fierce. So having lived actively or worked in a corporate maybe in the early 90s, I was just reminded of the liberalization time. You know, when India, the economy was liberalized and many multinational companies came in. Okay, one of the industries which got affected badly was the consumer durables industry. Specific to televisions, let me tell you, let me take one product. Prior to 1994, if you remember in those days, you remember there was some television brands like Dianora, Solidaire, BPO. After 94, what happened is companies like LG, companies like Samsung, companies like Sony were allowed to come and sell their products in the country. The competition was fierce. And today we are living in a situation where the brands which I told you are non-existent. There is no brand called Solidaire. There is no brand called Dianora. Okay, only the brands that we are popularly known, even in our homes, sometimes we are buying only the multinational brands. We are buying the LG, we are buying the Samsung, etc. So which means that for the existing institutions, the competition is going to be intense. They have to improve. Otherwise, like I was talking of those examples, you know, they will lose the race. The positive sign is the gross enrollment is going to, the government is going to take steps to improve the gross enrollment ratio. So therefore, there will be more takers for the education. But however, if we are not competent enough, then we will be out of the race. So these are the challenges to the existing institutions too. So because I've been asked to make my presentation very brief for 15-20 minutes, I think I'm coming to the conclusion after talking about the challenges that are going to be faced for the government, the challenges that are going to be faced by the foreign institutions that are coming here, the challenges that are going to be there for the existing institutions. Let me conclude by saying that positively, the education environment after this is going to be of high quality, student-centric, and highly competitive. Okay, student-centric, what exactly that 4 different certificate, diploma, degree, and then honors, you know, that all talks of, you know, carrying the credits, all these talks of how student-centric the new education policy is going to become, and how the international universities also will be student-centric. They are, of course, highly student-centric as far as the current scenario is concerned. And quality, of course, there will not be any compromise because, like I told you, the Higher Education Commission of India has divided into verticals and it's going to be good focus on providing accreditations to the institutions, and therefore quality will definitely be high. And then it's going to be highly competitive too. Then the positive part is, from a personal point of view, you know, hoping that universities from the Ivy League would come and set up their base in India. Okay, the Ivy League, when we talk of, you know, these are the 8 elite group of colleges with reputation in academic excellence, selectivity in admission, and social elitism. These members are of this Ivy League are Harvard University, Columbia University, Brown University, Cornell University, Dartmouth College, Princeton University, Yale University, and University of Pennsylvania. Just imagine if all these universities set up their campuses in India. It will be a great place to study. And the students are never going to be disappointed because these are all people who could give the best in education. And who else but, you know, the Indian counterparts, other universities and other colleges also will learn and will try to emulate many of the best practices in those institutions, thus making education really worthwhile in the country. Then there are going to be a lot of challenges for the teaching fraternity. And it is of immense importance that the younger generation of teachers upskill their teaching and research skills in order to be in the race. When we talk of foreign universities coming into India, we know that they focus a lot on research. And how much of research an individual faculty is doing, how much of research contribution is there by the university or the college as such, all these things are going to be measured. And therefore, it is of vital importance for the teaching fraternity to upgrade their skills. Starting from immediate, they have to start doing that. Otherwise, they also will be sidelined in the race for getting a good job or getting a promotion or things like that. Okay, but of course, Finally, overcoming challenges is an ongoing activity for the government and businesses. And we'll have to wait and see how the stakeholders I have mentioned will tackle them. So thank you once again to the management of Nilgiri College of Arts and Science for giving me this opportunity to speak a few words on these challenges. And I thank you all once more.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it was an add-on to the topic which has been already presented with a little more elaborated way, that giving a clear-cut insight on how the foreign universities will be coming in and what are the challenges. So the way you anticipate things, it's truly inspirational, and it would have been given a clear picture to the respective managements and educational the stakeholders. Of course, when the scenario is going to witness a larger change, then automatically we'll have to be prepared for the same. So I think Dr. Ravi Kumar sir, he done a wonderful the panel presentation. Thank you very much. And I think the questions or the queries will be adding more, and we love to hear from all the delegates later. And we want to finish the panel presentations before 12:30. So I request Dr. Vimala Madam. She will also, I have already introduced, and she will also add some her insights on the topic. And please.
So very good afternoon to one and all present here. Really, it is a very happy occasion to have a discussion with you all. And Srinivasan sir and Ravi Kumar sir really have posted excellent challenges what we are going to face of bringing the foreign universities in, that is in add to the Indian universities. And additional to that, I would like to add something. I hope my voice is audible, right?
Perfect, please.
Okay. And additional to that, I would like to bring something, because according to the NEP 2020, what sir have said, that Bharathiar University is an autonomous institution. That's why we have an opportunity to undertake whatever initiative is good for our students. So before that NEP education, Bharathiar University in 2016 itself, we have introduced the vocational courses to the students. Bharathiar University affiliated colleges as well as university has taken. Actually, it really works very, very well. Actually, vocational, because we haven't take anytime entry, anytime exit, because it is not going to happen, especially in South India. This we had a discussion in that when we went to our South Indian people represented in skill sector in 2017 in Bombay. Because here the dropout is less. Even the students, once you join the degree, they are not making a dropout except very few. So here the BVoc degree also, vocational degree also is going like a regular degree. And some noise is coming, I hope so. Okay. So that is, so like that it is going very well. And in that education, especially what Srinivasan sir also added, first initially government has given a fund, 183 lakhs is given for the BVoc vocational programs. Now they are not offering, they are encouraging the affiliated colleges, private colleges also can go ahead the like an vocational program without fund, but they can pool they can pool their resources what they wanted, but they should be go with the proper education with the assessment. One difficult what I'm feeling under this vocational education coming for a skill set assessment, because whenever we are setting a new way according to their education policy, because now they've concentrated more on vocational education. Whenever we are setting any kind of vocational education, the government is asking us to identify job role certificate. So once if I identified the job role certificate, I had to tie up with the any sectors that's a related sectors, because we have a 38 sectors skill council in India under NSDC. So we had to match the sector skill with the job role to your degree. So there alone I feel little difficulties, because the sector skill is maximum 41% of them, 49% government is sharing, and remaining 59% that's a private is sharing. So whenever we are approaching the sector skill to come for an evaluation and assessment, they are unable to cope up sometimes, not in every time, they are unable to cope up. This is what one difficulty we are feeling under the vocational education. But otherwise, the vocational education is going very well. Especially Bharatiya University is offering 2 vocational programs. One is multimedia and animation, and another one is business process and data analytics. That is in 3 batches has gone. 3 batches people have employed. Those who are interested to go for a job, immediately they employed, because this education emphasizes that we had to tie up with the local industries as well as the reputed industries. So the department have tied up with more than 10 to 15 industries of local industries for the particular degree, as well as tie up with the reputed industries related to the degree. So that also makes a very good, it actually works very well, vocational education. And that is another one is blended education, and that NEP is appreciating the blended education. We are taking care of blended education with some of the foreign universities. Example like Australia, Public University of Melbourne. The first year student, animation student, first 3 years my students will study here. Sorry, 2 years. The third year the student will go to that's Melbourne University. They can equip. If they want to research, they can continue 1 more year also. That is also we are appreciating. Yeah. And that is what so we would like to go for the research work, and that is for that we are also linking the research oriented aspect as well as the faculty exchange program. It is all goes very well. And they take for an example industry 4.0 and 5.0, because the government is appreciating whenever we are getting any kind of new technology which emerges, another 15 years, 10 years or 5 years if they emerges, immediately that also has to be take part in addition to the existing degree. So that's why Bharatiya University has taken, now initiated almost all the degree. We have industry 4.0 courses like artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, as well as data analytics. Many of the courses we are given. And take for example, that is an community program. We are working with the government, that is a main is 2 more institutions. One is we are working with Stockholm University, Sweden, and another one is we are working with the Melbourne University Community College program. That we are joined together with the that's a public university, and we are offering skills, some of the teaching methodology to the school students. Sir, we are working with Mahatma Gandhi National University and entrepreneurship development of Tamil Nadu. So that is also brings a really good opportunity to the students to learn the entrepreneurship skills. And as well as we have a model career center. I think Kerala also we have a model career center in Calicut University. That one they've been, because the government is offering, central government is offering 3 crore funded project that. And through that model career center, they are offering guidance and counseling to the students. That is helping a lot to the people to understand the education level, opportunity, job opportunity, how to improve the skill, and wherever the job opportunities available in India, as well as for NEP 2020 is really appreciating that apprenticeship program, internship program. You can also add some apprenticeship with the credit. You can go that credit up to 12 credit for one apprenticeship program, might be 3 months or 6 months. You can add this apprenticeship program in the existing curriculum itself, or you can create a new curriculum. For example, that is we have one curriculum we have got it in the Bharatiya University, BVoc Mechatronics, MVoc Mechatronics. That degree we have been tie up with the Siemens company, and also we are working with the Electronic Skills Sector Council of National Skill Development Corporation. So what actually we are doing, the students for every year, for the first semester they will be with us for 2 months. The third month they will be working with they will be in the Siemens company, because and 2-3 papers we are offering, and the same set credit goes for their regular internship programs. So what it makes them, it adds their skill. They can also understand that what kind of skill they are expecting for the mechatronics students. So like that, the NEP 2020 is appreciating the occasional education, blending education. Whenever any kind of skills or knowledge emerges, that also you can flexibly include. And one more thing they're given in the apprenticeship program, the student who studied 24 credits in their degree they are straight away eligible to enter that 24 credit related degree in future. For example, I'm a chemistry student. For example, I'm telling. For example, I'm a chemistry student. I pursued 3 papers related to zoology or microbiology. If the credit, that is, and if I completed 24 credits of the particular paper, in future, I can join MSc zoology or MSc microbiology. Okay. The student who's pursuing economics paper, 3 papers, economics related 3 papers, if the student have earned 24 credit, the student can straight away enter the MS economics also after their postgraduate. So this kind of opportunities is given because already the time is over, and these are all the some of the really wonderful program in NEP 2020. And some difficulties what Ravi Kumar sir really added as a really excellent information he has given. One thing, if you want to maintain the quality, you should have the proper rules and regulation to be laid down. The university, because what Srinivasan sir said that NEP 2020 appreciates no affiliation. If no affiliation in the sense, who will be the monitoring authority? How we are going to assess the student, competency, as well as the and how their systematic work is going on in the particular institution. How we'll assess, how we are going to recognize the degree as the whole to the world. That is a one problem. And second problem, I already said, sector skill domination may become. And because it is not a government sector, it's a private sector. Actually, most of the sector skill is a private sector. That private sector, every year they are increasing the fees. The first year they said 800, second year they said 1000. Now they are setting, that is, now they are quoted that 1500 for a single assessment. That is also one issue may become for the vocational education. And third thing, that reservation and quota system and all, definitely for the foreign university once it enters in India, definitely it won't be work out because it is a skilled oriented. So that is also has to be an argument to enhance to compete in that level of foreign universities, because whenever any PhD evaluation goes, we are sending our PhD evaluation PhD book for the foreign evaluation. So far, I haven't think that none of the foreign universities have sent any PhD thesis to Indian faculty members. Might be there, I'm not at all aware about that. In this kind of situation, how Indian government is going to equip the faculty member to meet the particular level, as well as whenever the new emerging trends comes, how faculty is going to meet, all those things definitely that's a question mark. And the infrastructure facility, and how we are going to bring all those information to the nook and corner of India. So these are all the some of the challenges we have. So with that, really due to the time short, and I'm so sorry, some 2 times interrupted in that is in my desk. I'm so sorry for the viewers. And once again, I thank the Nilgiri College management, Rafiq sir, as well as the principal, and my panel people, as well as the participants. Thank you so much for the wonderful opportunity provided me. Thank you. Really, it's a wonderful opportunity to have a Srinivasan sir talk. Thank you so much. I have some of the question also to ask Srinivasan sir. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, madam.
And once again,
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir.
so
Once
much,
again,
madam.
I thank my Vice Chancellor and Registrar.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Actually, indeed, it's a hands-on experience while implementing or initiating this kind of global exposure initiatives under the auspices of university. Heading the department, I think the add-ons given by Dr. Vimala Madam, it's truly important, and we thank you in spite of the technical glitches that you managed, and you were able to give well, and it was actually we needed your presence. It's while implementing of these affairs in the higher education, how far it is becoming practically possible. So that's why we, in spite of your university schedule, we asked you to be here for this program. So thank you very much for participating. In spite of all this, you managed with 2-3 places, I believe.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now the forum is open for the discussion. And Mr. Mahesh is not seeing online here. And before I think the questions, dear friends, everybody can share the feedbacks or the queries or the questions, and you can mention whom you want to ask. Either you can send me private or you can send in the chat box. The respected Professor T.P. Srinivasan sir, our beloved chief guest, and the two panelists are here, and you may please share the questions accordingly. And meanwhile, before moving to the questions, I want to release a launch. And because there were almost 2,000 plus login in this today's Zoom webinar. Yesterday also 1,800 login were there. And every single minute we are admitting 10 or 5 to 15 members, because it is the people are, maybe because of the bandwidth issue, the people are coming and going. And even then we are maintaining that 350 plus candidates from the beginning. And it was 500 in the beginning. And the Facebook also more than 1,000 people are viewing online. So I'm just launching a poll. Please, participants, just put your suggestion here. We wanted to release in front of our chief guest. That's it. So the questions are here. Now you can just mark whichever you suggest. There are 3 questions. You please feed your feedbacks. Do you favor NEP as a positive policy for the betterment of future education in India? Number 1, fully agree, partially agree, and they totally disagree. Do you feel intensifying private participation will strengthen our education system in India? Do you think NEP will be materialized as envisioned? These are the 3 questions. We just wanted to see the vibes of all the delegates. You are the scholars and teachers and academicians and management representatives. So I hope the feedback which we need not to want, we will be releasing the launch now. And just please, maximum people, please, you just participate in this poll. Yeah, I think it will be a random sampling from the participants. Then I'm sharing the result. Do you favor NEP as a positive policy? I think 28% people, 64% of people agree with the same, and 36% partially agree. And luckily to see, there is no one disagree with the point. And the second thing, do you feel intensifying private participation? 45% fully agree with the privatization. I think Srinivasan sir, that's also a recommendation that the people inference is totally in line with your presentation. So I think they are telling private participation will strengthen the education system. 64% of people are sharing that. And do you feel intensifying and the NEP as a positive policy? And the last question, do you think NEP will be materialized as envisioned? Maybe we are Indians. That may be the reason. 55% of the people are still hopeful it won't be implemented. So I don't know why. So 55% partially only agree, only 43% people are thinking that NEP will be implemented as such. So anyway, the poll also been shared to the panelists. And now the question to the first question, so our T.P. Srinivasan sir. So while implementing the system in the academic professional degree as in the educational sector, as we've seen in the Denmark and other foreign countries, so the question is the clean Danish model of secondary tertiary division education, something related to, I think, the hindrance of implementing the foreign model of education in our higher education sector.
Well, we are not going to, I'm not recommending that we should copy everything that is in foreign universities. We have to pick and choose what we want to do, depending on our own priority. So it is not a matter of simply copying the syllabus, etc. We have to have a national touch on it, and our own impact on it, and our social requirements, all that. I don't know what the question is, whether we will just take foreign university syllabi, etc. It is not so. We'll devise our own syllabus, but on the basis of, as I said earlier, on the basis of best practices already established as such, and has proved itself valuable to the international community. That's what I meant. Does it answer the question?
There is an interesting question. So the NUP speaks about the existing students and what will be the policy to empower the pass-out students in an NUP context. Because we are talking about the future generation. So how will you manage the all generation? Or not all, but the existing pass outs?
Can I?
What's your insight on addressing the existing graduate
Hello?
community?
Do you hear me?
Yes, sir, please.
No, but what was the question?
So addressing the concern is NEP is talking about the future education, future students. So what will be your insight to address the graduate community that are there and pass out students are there? How the system will equip them?
Well, they have to deal with the situation as it is, because you cannot go back and educate them again. So that is why I've been saying that we should not lose time. Those who are outside the universities or in the advanced classes, what can you do for them? You cannot take them back. And they will have to find their own ways and means. Because whenever there is a reform, there will be always these marginal cases, which will be neither there or here. And one of the reasons why people hesitate to reform education is because of that. I myself in school lost 1 year suddenly because some classes were mixed and I had to sit in the same class for 1 more year. And so such things happen when there is reform. But those cannot be taken as a general issue. We have to pick up where they are at the moment, and the others have to be somehow compensated.
Yeah. One another question is to Ravi sir. I think you were talking about bringing the NEP is preferring to bring the top 100 universities. So how far this will be practically possible? Because the Cambridge, Harvard, any such universities not even opened any such off campuses in anywhere in the world. So how far that will be practical? Do you think?
Okay, yeah, I will answer that question. See, India is going on a war footing as far as this NEP implementation is concerned. Even yesterday, our Honorable Prime Minister, when he was speaking at the convocation in Mysore University, was saying that he wants to make India the global education hub. So with this sort of a vision, when it is going, there is going to be so many people who are going to be at work to make this successful. So therefore, when the world knows that India is very serious about it, India is working on this, and a lot of intellectuals are putting their mind into it and bringing it out, definitely there is going to be some good response from these universities. Okay, so I'm sure that from the top 100, slowly, it's not going to happen immediately, maybe not 1 or 2 years or 3 years. Maybe we are talking of a time frame of, say, 10 to 15 years. In a 10 to 15 years time, we will find major chunk of the universities coming into India. And let me also tell you that there is a situation where, like Srinivasan sir was saying, linkages. Already, if you take, many of the good institutions are having linkages with some leading universities, which are in the top 100 itself. So therefore, it will be a question of time before those universities sense there's an opportunity in India. It's going to be a global hub, and then they start coming to India. So the chances are very bright for getting a major chunk of the 100 universities into India. That is my viewpoint.
Okay. So one of the participants, he wants, yeah, please, sir.
Just to add to what Mr. Vikumar said, we may also have to relax this 100 number kind of rigidity, because we may not be able to get as many from that region. They are all in the seller's market, as it were. I can give you my own experience. My son was professor in Columbia University, and some university wanted to talk to the Columbia University about some kind of linkages. They said, please pay $25,000 first. So because they are so much in demand and they don't want to waste time talking to somebody, simply explaining or exploring, etc. So they are very much in demand, all these universities. So they're not going to jump onto any discussion. It's not going to be easy. And therefore, we may have to relax this, because we cannot say that there are only 100 universities worth collaborating. There are many more. So we may have to go to a certain, say, a second level of university that were maybe necessary. But still, they will be very useful for us.
Okay. So one of the participants is wishing to speak in person and ask, and I am giving the opportunity, but the time should be very short. Okay. Ajit sir, please. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Abdul Razak. Sir, it was a very interesting lecture by all of you. but I have a question which can be linked with Mr. Ravi Kumar and Mr. T.P. Srinivasan. Mr. Ravi Kumar has raised all the points that I had to raise. And since Srinivasan sir was talking about the same question that our university also faced when such issues were being discussed, Nobel Prize, how many patent rights, how many, what is the impact factor, what are the research publications, international ranking, and so on and so forth. Sir, do you think it is very Indian when we are all trying to Indianize the whole system, which is the present government is out to do all these things? You have been very critical of the present government as well as the Kerala government. That's why I'm asking you this question. If that is the logic, if that is the point that they are trying to, I don't want to say they are trying to saffronize the Indian education, which is a very, very wrong thing to say, but they are trying to at least monopolize or deconstruct or destroy the existing system that everybody was talking about, the challenges to the existing institutions, including poaching of staff. Sir, it has happened even among the government institutions like JNU. I'm told all these great minds were poached by Mrs. Indira Gandhi to bring all those guys to JNU. And we are the victims of such poaching. Anyway, sir, my direct question to Srinivasan sir is, if this is what we are, even you seem to recommend that internationalization, international ranking, which will be the first yardstick to measure our university. And what is Indian that is left in this? I'm not trying to be patriotic. I'm just asking you a very straight question, since you have faced all these criticisms and appreciation, accolades as well as brickbats. I'm asking you a very straight question. What is Indian left in this? In your whole lecture, I don't see anything that I can, as an aspiring educationist,
The question is clear.
contribute to this.
We'll get his review.
NEP.
Please.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that question. First of all, let me say whatever Mr. Ravi Kumar said, what he mentioned as challenges, I see them all as opportunities. That is one point I want to make about what he said. He listed out a number of things, but they're all opportunities, not just challenges. And as far as Indianization, or if you prefer saffronization, there is no saffronization in this policy. I have not seen any. Some people point out the fact that there is Sanskrit to be taught. And Sanskrit is not saffron. Sanskrit is taught in the best universities in the world. And there is nothing saffron about it. The second